In this section, we want to talk about the treasurer and the responsibility of the treasurers. Now, I like to say there's always two workhorses, kind of like if you watch Bonanza or Gunsmoke like I do and enjoy seeing all that activity going on. You ever notice that the fastest pulled wagons are pulled by two horses? That's kind of like finance. It takes the two horses, the financial secretary and the treasurer, to get the money in and get the money out. Now, I'm not calling y'all horses. Hear me clearly. I'm calling you the hard workers of the team. You're receiving as financial secretary. And now let's talk about the treasurer. The treasurer is the bookkeeper of the church. They disperse the money and they make sure that they get it recorded so that any and everyone can see that the money is properly recorded. So when we think about the treasurer being the bookkeeper, they've got to help build a budget around the receipts and disbursements. Why would I have a separate chart of accounts that don't even represent my receipts and disbursements? They've got to be the same. So as I begin to think about my reporting that I'm going to do, the budget is going to direct the reporting. You have these budget items, this is what you spent. You budgeted to receive X number of dollars, this is what you received. So you'll have a receipts and disbursements that's compared to budget so that the church, the responsible leaders, the congregation as a whole can see that we're living into what we said we were going to do, spending the levels at what we said we were going to spend, so that all ministries receive their fair part. Another thing that the treasurer wants to report are our assets. What bank accounts do we have? What investments do we have? What's the value of our fixed assets? How much money do we owe? What's designated and what's restricted? And then that we're living into the necessary information for our statistical reports, our payroll reports, and our 1099 forms. You see, it becomes really important to have good, adequate bookkeeping so that all the elements that we have to take care of in other areas can easily be done because the records are clear. Now let's remember, in our reporting, the treasurer is responsible for reporting all funds of the church. Every fund goes through the church. So you got a choice. Do you allow all the Sunday school classes, the men's club, the youth groups, the trustees, do you allow all of them to have separate bank accounts, or do you require one bank account? That's your choice, and you'll do that inside your internal control document. If I have one bank account, I've got to be certain that I'm doing the right kind of bookkeeping so that each of the groups know their money is safe and well protected and accounted for accordingly. If I allow different checking accounts, then the treasurer needs to review those checking accounts every month, because at the end of the year, the audit's going to require all checking accounts inside of the financial statement. Stats are going to require all that information. So, in my opinion, practicality says let's have one bank account and a good set of bookkeeping records. But the church may say, we never had it that way before and we're not going to have it now. That's fine. Figure out how you as the treasurer does the reporting to the different groups. The Benevolence Committee, the Good Samaritan Fund, all of those need to be in there. Now, the only one you can't take over is the UMW. Now, the United Methodist Women report to the National Division, and so your best bet is not to even have conversation about that. Other than you find out how much they received and how much they spent, because you got to report that on the statistical table. Now, if they're not a chartered UMW, if they're the women's club, the women's Sunday school class, those have to come to you. It's only the chartered UMW. Now, the funny part about that, it's only the women. Now, the men in 2016 tried to get that same type setup where they didn't have to report theirs in, they reported to the general church. And before we could even take a vote on that, we found ourselves adjourning general conference and walking away. So men, turn your bank statements in to the treasurer. Women, y'all keep handling it. Just like you've been doing, and treasurers, you better learn the difference and don't ask the wrong group for the wrong thing. When we think about our cash disbursements, please never prepare a check without supporting documents. Oh, write me a check for the pizza I bought for the kids last night at NYF. It was about $32.16. I think that's right. Nope, I need a receipt before I can write you a check. Okay, here it is. Oh, it's $29.16. You see why you ask for receipts? I can prove to the people that gave the money for the church that I only spent what had actually been accounted for. So be sure you've got documents that support it. Make sure those documents are approved by the budget person that's responsible for that budget. So you ask when the budget's put together, remember we say, okay, who's responsible for those line items? And then I as treasurer know who to go to get them to sign off on the spending of those funds. Now, it's very important to think about the signatures on the checks. There's two things to look at. Number one, you can require 2 signatures, you can require 1 signature. You set that up in your internal control document, ever how you want it to be. But if the treasurer is reconciling the bank statement, you must have 2 signatures, because otherwise I'm writing the check, I'm deciding who told me I could write it, I'm writing it for the amount I want to write it, and then I'm reconciling it. In other words, I own the checkbook. I own God's checkbook. So if the treasurer is reconciling the bank statement, 2 signatures. I can have 1 signature if someone else reconciles the bank statement. So that's just a decision you're going to make and how you're going to operate that inside your local church. The first signature on every check should be the treasurer. The reason for that is I want the treasurer to say to me, number one, there's cash in the bank. I am not in the habit of signing a bad check. Number 2, there's a budget item from which to pay that. And number 3, there's still money left in that budget. So the treasurer's signature does not authorize the payment unless it's only 1 signature. It says to you there's money, there's budget, and there's funds left in the budget. Now, I would recommend you have 5 signatures. First one is the treasurer. Then I would have 3 more that could be in any order you really want them in, but it needs to be somebody that understands the church and the spending and how the budget works and how to look at those things. So my suggestion to you is, number 2 would be the finance chair. If the finance chair is the one that helped build the budget, that was one that reported the budget each month to the admin council, then they would be a good one to sign the checks. Trustee chair, because they're the legal entity of the church, they would probably be a good 3rd person. 4th person, SPRC chair, admin council chair, somebody that understands where that money is spent and how to read those. Again, any order you want to put them in, but don't play the order. If the finance chair is not available to sign, don't jump down to the pastor parish. Go to the trustee chair as the 3rd person in line, because it would begin to look like, well, I just wait till these people aren't available and I go get my friend to sign it, and then suspicion occurs. Do you think somebody's stealing money? They never use the first 2 people on the list to sign checks. They always go down to number 3 and number 4, and you build suspicion. So set up the process. Who will sign, how many will sign, who will sign, and in what order. If I was number 3 on the list, I would explain why I'm signing, because the finance chair is on vacation to Alaska, and so I signed the check. Make sure that you get that set. And the last on the list, in my opinion, should always be the pastor, not to sign a check made payable to themselves. Never, never should a pastor sign a check payable to themselves. But if everybody's gone and it's time to pay the electric bill, then we need to be able to sign that check and get that check signed. I would also have in my internal control that the pastor may not sign a check except in the absence of all those listed before him or her, and after 24 hours from when the person can return. So if somebody's coming back tomorrow, then we'll sign that check tomorrow with them. But if not, if the people that are signing ahead of me as pastor won't be available in 24 hours or 48 hours, then I would sign it. Or if there's an emergency, the electric company stand outside with the wrench and they're going to cut your electricity off. If you don't give them a check right now, I'd sign a check. Because that probably will happen in July on the hottest day of the year, and then everybody will be mad on Sunday morning because there's no air conditioner in the church. So be careful with your signatures. Some of you don't like to put your pastor on the signature card. I hear that, I understand that. But what I need to say to you is simply this. The pastor is appointed to the church as the official United Methodist representative in the church. That person should be able to sign checks in the event that no one else is available to sign. That makes sure that we have got a United Methodist presence on that card. You think about it. When Katrina blew through, I remember getting a call 2 or 3 times that there was nobody to sign checks. Everybody was gone. And I said, well, can't your pastor sign it? I know where your pastor is. And the response was, we don't want our pastor signing checks. Quite honestly, those places added the pastor's own later. So I've heard from some of you. I know some of you don't like that idea. I apologize for that. But I also say it's the best practice to make sure the pastor can sign. And pastors, hear me again loud and clear. If that check is made payable to you or anyone in your family, do not sign it. Just wait. It can be signed at a later date. Be sure you cancel the supporting documentation. Now, what does that mean? That means write paid, the date, and the check number on the bill so that it can't be resubmitted for repayment. Don't accept copies of bills. Get the original bills if you can. I attach a copy, the third part of the check stub, to the paid bills in the conference office. That saves me writing paid, date, and check number because all that's on the copy of the check itself. So figure out how you want to do that. Put it in your internal control documents and follow that. Keep voided checks. I was auditing back in my day of practicing and auditing cities, and I asked the city clerk for her voided checks. And she said, well, if they're void, I just throw them away. And I said, well, how do I know that they were really voided? And she said, because I told you. And I said, So I spent the next 2 days going through all the bank statements, trying to find those voided check numbers to make sure they truly were voided. So make it easy on whoever's doing your audit. Make it easy on anybody that wants to know what you do with the voided checks. Mark them void and keep them in a file marked void. Actually, in our office, we'll put an excuse of why it was voided. Check written for wrong amount, check in the printer and something printed on it instead of a check. We'll say what it is. Never make checks payable to cash. It's got to be made payable to an individual. So I kind of have fun with youth workers because they're, the ones that have got to have petty cash because they're selling T-shirts or selling candy bars or selling something, and they need a petty cash fund. I had one nice young youth director, and I made the check payable to him, and I said to him, be sure that you bring the money back to us separate from the money you receive for selling the goods so that we can put it in. I said, because the check made payable to you is in accounts receivable from you. Well, he didn't listen very well. Brought all the money back, everything he collected, it was all there. That was wonderful. We deposited it. So I knew what he had done. So I just fixed me up a fake paycheck, deducted the $500 out of his paycheck, and took it to him. I said, here's your paycheck. And he said, it's $500 short. I said, yeah, because you got $500 when you had that event and you didn't bring that $500 back to me. Oh, it was in with all the other money. I said, yeah, right, prove it. And so we went through and he showed me how many things he had sold and what he sold them for, and it all added up with an extra $500. But you know what? He has yet to miss a time to return that money to me separately. Set it up so that you make checks out to somebody and somebody's responsible for that money. Either I've got a bill or petty cash got returned to me. Be certain that that's in your internal control documents. And make sure you keep those blank checks in a safe place. People know how to forge names. So they can write a check, forge a name on it, steal the money from the church because you left all your blank checks sitting on the desk. Put them in a safe place. Locked file cabinet, wall safe, somewhere. Just protect those blank checks. As you do your bookkeeping, be sure you get your expenses in the correct period. Now, month to month sometimes don't really matter a lot to folks, but I can't charge the 2020 expenses to 2021 because I've overspent the budget. It's got to be charged to 2021, and then we got to talk about overspending the budget. Be sure they're in the right period. If you've got petty cash, that's fine. Have a small petty cash for small disbursements. I need a battery for the camera. So I'm going to run next door. Well, I don't want to have to use my conference credit card to buy the battery. So I'll get money out of petty cash. I'll go buy it, bring the money back, bring the receipt back, and get my change. But I want to do petty cash vouchers to show what it was spent for, who authorized it, who spent it, who gave it out. Petty cash is in charge of one person. And then I want to be sure I do a surprise audit. I want to go in, and whoever has the petty cash, I want to count the money, I want to count the receipts, and they need to equal what my balance sheet says so that I always know everything's being accounted for. Also be certain if you're transferring money from one bank account to another, don't just move it one way or the other. That almost looks like window dressing, like kiting, which is ways that people steal money. If the minutes say the treasurer has the authority to transfer $500 to the United Methodist Foundation, put it in the minutes. Have that authority. If I do it on a weekly basis because I'm trying to keep as much money in the foundation to earn interest on, then copy somebody on what you've done so that somebody besides you as the treasurer knows you're using money back and forth between accounts. Because again, that can raise suspicion. Be careful. Be careful. And never, ever, as long as the day is ever, use a church debit card. A debit card gives you the whole bank account. Everything that's in there right now and what you might deposit later today, as long as I got a debit card, I can clean that sucker out. So don't use a debit card. Credit cards are fine because you can set those at levels at which people are responsible for. And quite honestly, the level I use is the salary a person makes. And they will never have more credit than what they make. Because why? If they misspend it, I want it out of that next paycheck. So I'm not going to have additional amounts. So think through these things. You know, it's not something you can quickly decide. It's not something you use all my examples for. How does it work in your church? What is your local context? Develop your internal control policies and then follow them. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Make sure your reconciliations are done either by a person not signing checks, or if it's a person that signs checks, that there are two signatures on those checks. Don't forget your surprise audit of petty cash, and examine outstanding items on the bank reconciliation. That's where it can really get kind of fishy. Here's an example. I was doing an audit of a group. There were 20 checks on the outstanding list payable to the IRS. Now, you know and I know the IRS can get those checks out of the envelope and get them to the bank and the ink smeared on it because it hadn't even dried before they deposit it. And yet this person was telling me they had 20 checks payable to the IRS over a 20-month period, which was the tax deposit. I said, that doesn't make sense to me. Anytime I don't pay my tax, I get a letter. She opened the drawer on this side and said, there are all the letters. Well, we had to relieve her of her duties at that point because she was not handling the funds in the way that they should be handled. Penalties, interest, all kind of problems existed. So if I look at the outstanding checks, I am certain that there's not something funny going on inside of those checks. Now, I know some of you churches, y'all hold on to the check until you're ready to spend the money. It just saves it getting in the bank account and getting spent on something else. That's fine. I know that. But also I would say to you, if I call you and say, hey, have you got check number 8623 still in your possession? And you say, oh yeah, it's sitting here waiting. We're fixing to spend it on that project we told you about. I'm fine. If you say, oh no, remember we told you to void that check. Then all of a sudden my bank balance is not right because I've got some checks that should have been voided, or it's right because people are holding those checks. Be sure you vouch those outstanding items on the bank reconciliation. And I can promise you this. If you make a deposit on the 22nd, you're going to see it on the date of the 23rd, if not the 22nd. Depends on what time you get to the bank. But if a deposit's made on the last day of the month, you may not see it on that bank statement. You'll see it the first day of the next month. But banks, by banking law, cannot hold deposits. They have to go ahead and record them. So if you've got outstanding deposits on your bank reconciliation more than one day, you need to find out what's going on, because those are not legitimate deposits in 90% of the cases. You want to be certain that once you get all your bookkeeping done, then treasurer, you report them monthly financial statements. You should give them a balance sheet, a budget comparison, and a bank reconciliation. As the finance committee, they should be looking at those three things that they've given you authority to do. So you report first to the finance committee, and then once it goes from the finance committee to the admin council, it gets reported there. It gives you that chance to talk to both groups. Now, we don't have a finance committee meeting every month, David. I said, oh, well, that's good. That's good. Mail them copies of these reports. Do not be accused of the treasurer who never reports unless the committee meets. Always hand them out. Now, it's always good to do a pre-meeting meeting with admin council. That allows the chair, the treasurer, a few folks to see it before you go in. And what normally happens is two things. They'll ask you enough questions that when you go into the meeting and you make your explanation, you can include the questions they ask, and normally there's no questions to the report. But if there are questions, then you're still able to answer them. I suggest to you QuickBooks is a wonderful way to keep the books for your smaller churches. Larger churches may use Shelby or something in that line. Have a process to do this with. And if there's no meetings before the admin council, also drop those in the mail to them. Now you can play the game with them. If you get an idea they're not reading those statements, call one of the members of the admin council and say, hey, did you see where you went over in your budget? I don't understand why your budget's so over. And, oh, it's not over. Well, look at your statement. It really is. And thank them for looking at it and hang up. They'll call you back. I'm not over budget. Oh, I'm sorry, that was another line. But you read the statement, didn't you? So you see, you want to get people to read your statements. You want to do the work. You want them to read it. You want them to use it so that there's trust, accountability, transparency in the work that you're doing. Why should you do the work if somebody's not going to look at it? And that's how you get people to look at it. So as the treasurer, you are the bookkeeper of the church, and all the bookkeeping records are yours to maintain and to keep. Be sure that the lockbox is there for valuables. You want to be sure that there are two people that go into that lockbox. Again, internal control policy. Make sure you've got an inventory of securities, of valuables, of equipment, non-cash. Make sure that that list is not put somewhere where it can be destroyed. The worst thing to have is a fire. The church burns down. The insurance company says, well, what did you have? Well, we had this wonderful list that said the date we bought it and how much we paid for it and what it was. Oh, that's what we need. Well, it burned up in the fire yesterday. Put it in the lockbox at the bank. Keep it up to date. And this also then allows your trustees to look at what you own so that they can be sure they've got adequacy of the insurance. So as the bookkeeper, you're keeping up with all those things. You see, you're the bookkeeper. You're in charge of doing all those records and making all those reports. And when that's done, there is transparency and there is accountability, and people will feel safe because what they gave to is where it was spent. And the Finance Committee's done their job in receiving, managing, and dispersing. As the bookkeeper, you're an integral part of that process.